If you're new with us this morning, we haven't met. My name is Jason. I am the pastor here at Faith Discovery Church. We call it FTC. We're glad that you're here. Honored that you've chosen to spend a little bit of your time with us this morning. I know many of you were planning on a picnic today because the weather is so great, but you chose to be here anyway, and I really appreciate it. For those of you joining us online who are at the picnic, enjoy the wonderful sunshine that I'm sure you're experiencing, but you're such an important part of our community. Encourage you to chat with each other during the message. Encourage each other. Wherever you are, church is better when you're here. I hope today church's experience is good for you. I hope you enjoy it. Hope is a word we're going to talk about a lot. I hope this is a beneficial thing for you today, but I can promise you, you being here is beneficial to people around you. The fact that you're here makes church better for everyone else. So thank you so much for being here. And with that done, go ahead and play that video. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 247 years ago, Thomas Jefferson wrote those words that would become the foundation of what we now call the American dream. They were among the first words designed to inspire people to believe in what America would be and could be. At the close of the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin looked at the painting on the chair that you see behind me that George Washington used for the nearly 3 months of this contentious, debate-filled Constitutional Convention. And he said, I've often looked at that picture behind the president without being able to tell whether it's a rising or setting sun. But at length, I have happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun, because he believed in what America could be. In his farewell address, the first farewell address from a president, George Washington wrote, it will be worthy of a free and enlightened and at no distant period a great nation, to give to mankind the magnanimous and not novel example of a people always guided by exalted justice and benevolence. He would go on to write that the nation that indulges in habitual hatred is in some degree a slave to its animosity. And that animosity would be sufficient to lead it astray from its duties and its interest. About 65 years later, as he delivered the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln would say, 77 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. Some of you memorized this in high school. Conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He would go on to say that here on that battleground that they were dedicating, where so many men had given their life, that they resolved that those dead had not died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, that the government by the people, for the people and of the people would not perish from the earth. In his second inaugural address, as the war was coming to end, Lincoln proposed that, he said, with malice towards none and charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive to finish the work that we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have been born in battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Several decades later, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, would say, among American citizens, there should be no forgotten men. There should be no forgotten races. He urged the nation in the middle of the Depression that in those days of difficulty, Americans everywhere must and shall choose the path of social justice, the path of faith, hope, and the path of love towards their fellow man. John F. Kennedy asked Americans to be more aware of what they could give their country than what they should receive from their country. When he said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, he was challenging America to fight tyranny and poverty and disease, even war itself. What can you do to help the person next to you? What can you do to serve your neighbor? What can you do to encourage the person in need? In 1963, Dr. King told the world that he had a dream. He had a dream that his 4 children would one day live in a nation where they were not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Ronald Reagan, in his farewell address to the country, after 8 years of being president, he said, I've spoken often in all my political life of the shining city. But I don't ever know that I've ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. He said, after 200 years, 2 centuries, she still stands strong and true on the granite ridge. Her glow has held steady no matter what storm, and she's a beacon, still a magnet for those who must have freedom, for all the pilgrims from all the lost places who are hurtling through the darkness towards home. Just a few years ago, Barack Obama in his inaugural address told us that our generation's greatest task is to make these words, these rights, these values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness available for every American. For 250 years, we have talked, we have heard about the hope of what America could be. And I love America. And I am privileged to live here and to celebrate its freedom. I'm privileged to stand in front of you in a country that has the right to assemble. But America has not achieved the hope of what it could be and should be and would be for every person. It hasn't. And so we stand here. The dreams are still just dreams for some. In fact, hope of what America could be has faded for some. For the tired, the poor, the huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the idea of what America could be has not yet been accomplished. 250 years. 250 years. It's a long time. Now stay with me for a minute as I take you back even further into history. 250 years. Feels like a long time. Saul became king of Israel in roughly 1021 BC. To that date, Israel had been led by a group of judges, by a group of people, but they wanted a king. God said, I'm your king. And they said, no, we want a king we could see. And so God gives them Saul. And just over 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, Saul takes the reins as the king of Israel. After Saul was David. Saul reigns for about 20 years. David becomes king. And when he became king, Nathan, his prophet, received this prophecy for the Lord over David. This is about 1,000 years before Jesus is born. Read it with me behind me. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Verse 16 is the promise. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. For roughly 45 years, Israel was a united kingdom. It found its heights in the reign of David. If you are really a history geek, as I am, you could go on Google and watch the progression of how big Israel got in terms of land amassed during the time of Saul into the time of David at its max, and then as it shrinks coming into Solomon. And then after Solomon, the kingdom splits because of taxes, because of unfair or unpopular practices. The kingdom that was 12 tribes splits. 10 tribes become the northern kingdom. It attains the name of Israel. 2 tribes become the southern kingdom. They become Judah. That's where eventually Jesus will live. It's where Jerusalem is. But the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, Israel becomes 2 states. In 721 BC, 700 years before Jesus, the Assyrian Empire invaded the northern kingdom and it ceased to exist. It's during this time in history, 700 years before Jesus is born, in the northern kingdom falls. The southern kingdom has a prophet. His name is Isaiah. And he's in Jerusalem, and about the time the northern kingdom is falling, just to give you a sense of what's happening in the world, about the time the northern kingdom is falling, Isaiah prophesies this, and you could read it in Isaiah 7:14. Hear now, you house of David. Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of my God also? And then he says, therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call him Emmanuel. 1,000 years before Jesus arrives, before Jesus is born, Israel heard through David's line they would have a king whose reign would be endless. 700 years, 300 years later, 700 years before Jesus is born, Israel hears that God is with them. That's what Emmanuel means. The virgin will give birth to a son, and his name will be Emmanuel, God with us. 700 years later, 300 years later, 700 before Jesus, Israel is promised, God is with you. Someone's coming to remind you, God is with you. But after those inspiring messages of hope, Judah would fall to Babylon. The temple would be destroyed. And Israel would experience more than 400 years of profitless quiet. It's called the intertestamental period, the time between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Israel doesn't hear from God, or at least doesn't hear from God in terms of from a prophet. During that time, just to give you a sense of history of what's happening during this time, Alexander the Great comes into power, starts the Greek Empire, amasses way more land than David ever did, and eventually takes over Israel. It's during those 400 years that the Maccabean revolt happens. Now, maybe you're not familiar with the Maccabean revolt, but that Jewish people celebrate Hanukkah because of that. And so you start to see all of how history that you've learned in school and biblical history are intertwined. And decades and centuries of time passes on, and the promises that had been promised just seem like they're empty. For so many Americans, the promise of what America could be in 250 years of inspiring messages of hope, they seem empty. Too many people are the marginalized, the poor, the hurting, the handicapped, just don't get all that they could get from this promised place. And that's 250 years. Times that by 3 or 4. And that's the Israel that meets Jesus. 1,000 years of seemingly unfulfilled promises. At the time of Jesus' birth, Israel's hope was based on ancient stories. 1,000 years of hope. 700 years of holding on to promises. When Jesus is born, Israel is tired. They're tired of not having independence. They're tired of not having a king. They're tired of being conquered. They're tired of their hope not being realized. As I thought about 1,000 years, I thought, that's so hard to wrap your head around the amount of time that is. So let me give you a sense of things you might have heard of that happened 1,000 years ago from our time now. 1,000 years ago, the first crusade happened. Anybody there? 1,000 years ago, the Normans invaded England. 1,000 years ago, the Catholic Church, which was the only church, split and became the Catholic Church in the West and the Orthodox Church in the East. 1,000 years ago is almost 500 years before Columbus sails the ocean blue. If you heard that poem when you were a kid, you got that. We're tired of waiting for what America could become. But Israel was holding out hope for 3 to 4 times that. Hope unfulfilled can be tiring. But Jesus offers a hope that rather than tiring, can be inspiring. And so this morning with my remaining time, and we're going to not be long today, you're going to be like, holy cow, this is a miracle. With my remaining time today, I want to offer you some things that are different about the hope that Jesus provides. Because when we come to Christ, when we put our faith in Jesus, we align ourselves, we tie ourselves, we put ourselves in to a different category, a different group. And the things that we hope for are a little different. And so this morning I suggest that what's different about the hope that Jesus provides is first, that it's not about attaining or acquiring. So often our hope is about what we could get, what we could receive, how we can make the next step, or I referenced it earlier, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the foundation of what has become the American dream. For so many of us, the American dream is the ability to buy a home with a white picket fence, or however you figure that category, whatever your dream is. Oftentimes our hope is something that we could acquire. Just a little bit more money. Just a little nicer car. On a rainy day, just a bigger umbrella. Hope is what we can acquire, but hope should not be confused with privilege, happiness, or a denial of just how broken things really are. You see, hope in Jesus doesn't deny the situation of the world. We live in a fallen world, a world that sin has corrupted. We don't have to deny that. We don't have to pretend that doesn't exist. It exists. You know what we sound like when we pretend it doesn't exist? Naive, crazy, ignorant. No, the reason why the hope of Jesus is so powerful is because it overcomes a broken world. And in a world of brokenness, you can still find hope, because it's not about what you can acquire or what you can attain or what you can hold on to. Jesus offers an opportunity to embrace true hope, because the pain and sinfulness of the world is acknowledged, and the pain and sinfulness of our own lives is too. There's been a repeated theme that I've just been coming back to. I feel like I've come back to it on Sunday mornings, but I've certainly come back to it in my conversations with people. It's this idea that somehow, no matter how much we talk about it, no matter how much we grasp, no matter how much we theorize, that we don't have to be worthy to receive the love of Jesus, we have a hard time putting that idea out of our mind and accepting the truth that you don't have to be worthy for Jesus to love you. You don't have to attain anything. You don't have to do anything. Jesus loves you. All you have to do is say thank you. Jesus, I accept your love. I acknowledge that I'm not worthy. And in my brokenness, I acknowledge I'm broken. I acknowledge it's not everything goes the way I think it's going to go. I acknowledge that there are times where I feel hopeless. But you provide me hope. Second, the hope that Jesus offers is not simply based on, or is not based on a simplistic optimism. Hope is not born from mere optimism. Leslie Newbigin famously said, "I am neither an optimist nor a pessimist. Jesus Christ is risen from the dead." Christian hope is not a whistling in the dark. It's not a way to minimize the starkness of reality. It's not a conviction. It is a conviction about the ultimate outcome of history, not something that might happen. Jesus defeated and conquered death, and he shares that with us. And my hope is not that it might happen. My hope is not that I might live eternally. My hope is not that heaven might be there for me. All those things are assured to me. Plus, my hope is that Jesus is with me now. Paul writes that I see right now through a glass dimly lit. I hope to see him face to face. Paul's not saying when I die, I get to see God. He's saying, I want every day to see him more clearly in my life. And the opportunity for that exists for us, no matter what your situations are. The hope that Jesus offers is not based simply on a potential dream. We've had a lot of history this morning, so why not just a little bit more? During World War II, there was a Serbian priest who was imprisoned at Dachau, which was a concentration camp. And from there, he wrote what would eventually become published in a book called Prayers by the Lake. And in one of these poems, and he would write poems and he would write prayers. In one of them, he writes, do not grumble against heaven, because it does not fulfill all your hopes. Grumble against yourselves, because you do not know how to hope. Heaven doesn't fulfill hopes, but hope. The most sublime and steadfast hope, heaven always fulfills. What he was doing in that moment is he was rebuking the smallness of our hopes and calling into question that we ever take hope in something that the world can offer to us. But that our hope isn't that our contentment can be found in a thing. But in the middle of a concentration camp, he says our hope is found in Jesus Christ. So it's not your hopes that become accomplished. It's not. We've been talking about Christmas lists in our house. I don't know if you ever made a Christmas list. But it's the J.C. Penney and Sears catalogs when we were kids were the things that hopes were built upon. I circled things so fiercely that my parents couldn't even see the picture on the paper anymore. Those little hopes and dreams are but crumbs from the table of what Jesus offers us. Because he doesn't offer us hopes. He offers us hope. That one could find such serenity and such peace in the middle of such hell as Dachau. The hope is found in Jesus. The hope of Advent reminds us that Jesus helps us push away our little hopes, our false hopes, and teaches us to place our confidence in the true hope of the world. In Matthew chapter 1, at the end of Matthew chapter 1, after the genealogy, Matthew tells the account of Joseph and the angel. The angel showing up to tell Mary, most of you know this. The angel shows up to tell Joseph that Mary's telling the truth, that she's a pregnant virgin. Because Joseph's like, that's not possible. And so the angel says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David. Notice the line there. 1,000 years later. 1,000 years later. Do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. Because he will save people from their sins. I have 3 sons. I've been fortunate and blessed that all 3 were healthy, and I haven't had to go through the difficulty of what it can be to be a parent, to find out when your child is born that there may be some complications. With each of those 3 sons, I've experienced the hope. I've thought about the hope of what could be. I have a friend whose son was born with Down syndrome. And they didn't know that he was going to have Down syndrome until he was born. And my friend tells the story that they love their son. In fact, he didn't know it at the time, but this was the best thing, the greatest thing that ever happened to them. But in the hospital, those first 3 days, his dream died. His dream of what he would be able to give his son, what his son would ever. And now he talks about how he's so grateful for the dream that was birthed those 3 days. I've never experienced that. I've heard people talk about it. I think if you ask me, one group of people who America, the dream has yet been fulfilled for, is the handicapped. I had hope for my boys. I never even imagined someone would say to me, they'll save people from their sins. Do you understand the magnitude of a promise like that? Joseph's contemplating, how in the world is this possible? What do I do? And the angel comes and says, it's possible. Because with God, We can have hope that the impossible is possible. And the improbable is possible. And then the unfathomable is possible. In Israel's history, part of the thing that they built their hopes on, was threefold. And some of you have heard me tell this. They built it on the Torah, which was the law, the book of the law, including the Ten Commandments, which was housed in the Ark of the Covenant, which had been lost. I know most of you have seen Indiana Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's not a documentary. We don't know where the Ark is. So, the Torah, the temple, which had been destroyed, and land, which had been taken away from them. All their hope was gone. They had built it on three things that they had lost. And they had lost them principally because of their sin. And the angel of the Lord comes and says to Joseph, he'll save his people from their sin. Now that's, for those of us who live now and understand the power of sin, and we've had theological debates, and we know we've been taught all this kind of stuff separates us from God. But for a person living in Israel, to be saved from their sin meant that he would restore their hope. He would bring back all the things that they had lost. Jesus restores hope to those who no longer have it. It's not based on a potential dream. It's a restoration of God's plan from the beginning. A couple more and we're done. The hope that Jesus provides is for everyone. Hope is for the poor, the needy. In fact, I read this week a person say, hope is the comfort of the poor and the needy. Those who don't have a place to find comfort, they put it in the hopes that someday they will. I don't ever want to stand here and be political. Don't think that, that's not right. God's love is not dependent on your political affiliation. But in our country, too many people are without hope. And our country has, for its history, has tried to get them to have hope through what our country can provide. I love that our country wants to provide hope, but true hope can't be found in any government. True hope cannot be found in any individual. True hope is only found in Jesus Christ. We need to do better as a country. We need to do better. We need to care for people more. We need to love the unlovable. But true hope is only found in Jesus, and it is for everyone. People you disagree with, people you despise, people you don't know, people you think are unworthy. It doesn't matter. All the lists, the pros and the cons, if they're on the nice or the naughty, it's the hope of Jesus is for everyone. It is eternal. The difference about the hope that Jesus provides is that it is eternal. It doesn't fade. It's not going away. We read it earlier, and his kingdom will know no end. The hope that Jesus provides is forever. The true fulfillment of the hope some of us won't find till we reach heaven. My friend's son, he will not have Down syndrome in heaven. Just won't. He may not receive a full understanding of healing until then. Yesterday, I attended a funeral for my uncle. Not really my uncle, but he was Uncle Ben to me. He was my dad's college roommate. And I asked my dad yesterday, because my Uncle Ben was a big man, like big. Biggest man. He was tall, and he wasn't just tall, he was big. He needed to shop at the big and tall shop, if you get my drift. I said to my dad, Dad, did you ever know Uncle Ben when he wasn't big? He goes, nope, he was big. By that I mean he knew how to eat. There were pictures yesterday, I saw him in high school, as a high school wrestler, he was like big, muscular, built. That was not the Uncle Ben I knew, although he was strong. And because of his health, because of his size, over the course of his life, he had developed health issues. And 2 years ago, he had to have his leg amputated, and it got infected, and he had the more of his leg amputated. And so for the last couple of years, he walked with one leg and a prosthetic leg. You don't have to worry about the prosthetic leg now, because he's been fully restored. Because when we get there, there's no more sickness, there's no more disease. But there are those things here. But in spite of them, he provides hope. You can have hope today. Eternity includes today. And lastly, last one I can offer today is the hope of Jesus is not based on situations. Now, maybe you're here this morning and America's failure to live up to its offer of the American dream for everyone has exhausted you. Maybe you're tired of just hoping. My prayer for you today, and I'm going to close with this and then we're going to transition to communion, is out of Ephesians chapter 3. It's Paul's prayer for the Ephesians. And so this is what I would like to offer you today. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your innermost being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all God's holy people, to grasp how wide and how long and how deep and how high is the love of Jesus. To know that this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Then in verse 20, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. The angel said to Matthew, he will save his people from their sins. More than Matthew could have ever imagined. What is it that's bigger than anything you could imagine? What's the thing in life that just makes it almost impossible to hope? Jesus offers a solution for that. His hope is bigger than that. Would you pray with me? Jesus, thank you for the hope that you provide, that it's different than what we are accustomed to, what we think is right, what we think we need. You and your love and your hope is all sufficient. Help us to desire your hope, to seek your love, and to find our fulfillment in you. In your name we pray. Amen. I'm going to invite Gary and Doc to come forward. They're going to serve us communion this morning. And as they do that, here you go, Gary. You can come to the center aisle on either side and come forward to receive the elements from them. And then as you do that, bring them back to your seat and we will share communion together.